Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Kontsevoy, CEO of Gravitational, and I have Ben Arent joining me today. Ben runs product management for our open source project called Teleport. And Teleport, for those of you who don't know, is an identity-aware access plane for SSH servers and Kubernetes clusters. As I said earlier, it's an open source project, so you can find it on GitHub and download it on our website. But today, we're not talking about Teleport in general. Today's topic is awfully specific. We are going to be talking about remote access sessions and session controls. So we'll cover questions like, what is a remote session? How do you audit sessions? What kind of restrictions an organization should consider to enforce on sessions? And what kind of session controls need to be in place if you're trying to get FedRAMP compliant or SOC 2 compliant? So Ben is our invited expert, and he will help us cover these topics, and hopefully he'll show us a demo of how session control can be implemented in practice using open source tool like Teleport. We're just launching Teleport 4.4, which allows users to exercise more granular controls. But first, let's start with the basics. So Ben, tell us, what is an SSH session or a Kubernetes session?
Thanks, Ev. So to step back a bit, SSH stands for Secure Shell, and a bit of internet history. We used to have Telnet for accessing machines. SSH was around as a cryptographic protocol for securely accessing machines over an unsecured network, that unsecured network being the internet. And many people on this call, I know we have lots of customers who might be familiar with Teleport's SSH certificates, but many people will use SSH with public-private key cryptography. This is where you would sort of run a command like RSA-gen on your machine, and then you'd publish your public key to the host, and then you'd use your private key, and then everything's kind of encrypted through those public-private key crypto. But in the case of Teleport, it uses SSH, but it uses SSH certificates, which were introduced about 7 years ago. And you can think of this as, instead of having an office with individual keys that you give out to people, it's more like a smart card that you provide access. And once you get access for SSH, we also have things like interactive and non-interactive SSH sessions. Teleport covers both of these, and we'll sort of dive a little bit deeper into those later on. And a Kubernetes session is a little different since it works on a HTTP API. And so if you were to have a Kubernetes cluster and provide access to your developers, you might create a kubeconfig and use Kubernetes RBAC. But once you've given them that configuration, they sort of have access until you revoke it. And so Teleport, you can put Teleport in front of Kubernetes, and then it issues short-lived kubeconfigs. So those developers only get access for that period of time that you need them to provide access.
Nice, nice. So do not use SSH public-private keys. That's something that we keep repeating over and over again. And to control sessions effectively, you got to use Teleport with certificates. So Ben, you mentioned session control a couple of times. So let's so once we understand what a session is, so what is so what does it mean to apply session restrictions? What are the restrictions that an organization should consider applying to SSH or Kubernetes sessions?
Yeah, so I have restrictions on sessions, and I'm going to go through, I think I have 10 points here, starting with sort of the use case. So I guess you start off with like who is allowed to access the system. And so for Teleport, we put a like IDP. So this can be a SAML connector or OODC. We also connect with Okta or Active Directory. And so you link people's identities to Teleport's identities, which links to sessions. And then you can also say like, how long can those people access the system? And this is one of the key components of how long do you want those certificates to be. If you have a really strict environment, you might want to only say you can have access for an hour, or it could be for the working day.
Yeah, like someone just asked me a question on Twitter, I think. about using SSH keys versus certificates for CI/CD pipeline, like when you're deploying code. So like one a really cool way of using short-lived certificates, so you can issue a certificate per deployment, for example. So this way is if someone gets a possession of your CI/CD server, they can't really touch your production environment. So these things work not just with humans, right? They work with robots as well.
Yeah, some customers, they sort of try and export like a 1-year cert, but what we recommend is, you can just have a cron job that creates a certificate each day. And so you can create a new, so once the certificate expires, you can have like a 1-hour overlap of those two certs. And so, even if someone did have access to your Jenkins, you have a continual process sort of renewing the certs, which is a super handy feature of it. Next up, we have what do they do during the session? SSHD has the concept of like an audit log, but it can be sort of difficult to configure and set up. And Teleport provides a full JSON-based audit log that you can send to like a SIM solution. We actually have a pretty good webinar from Panther Labs about how you can sort of alert on these things back in our archive. And we also have like, what if you step away from the computer? This is what we call the idle session control. And this is the case in which, you leave your laptop open, but there's no activity on interactive sessions. The session will terminate. Is the session being shared? This is a unique feature to Teleport. I'll try and do a quick demo on this, but this lets developers sort of pair program or pair debug. And you can also limit this feature if you want to. How many sessions can they start? So you can think of this as like you have the key card, but you can only access one door at a time. This is one of the new additions in Teleport 4.4, and we'll sort of do a bit of a deeper dive into this, but this is our concurrent session control. And then there's once when the certificates expire, we have a flag that you can set up to automatically terminate the session. And one thing that comes up pretty regularly is like, how do I stop a session in progress? We have some of the machinery in our session control, but in 2021, we're going to investigate session locking, and this will be on the per user basis. And so if you haven't seen any nefarious activity, you'll be able to lock a user's cert for duration.
So these are restrictions that we recommend on SSH and Kubernetes sessions. And just to step back, like, why are we implementing these capabilities? Why do organizations want to do it? So on one hand, we believe this is just a common sense. You obviously want, first of all, you don't want to inconvenience engineers who are actually getting something done. But at the same time, you do want to make sure that like engineers don't have access to production systems. You want to make sure you have a central certificate authority that controls access. But another interesting and very important reason we're doing it is compliance and FedRAMP compliance specifically. So Ben, can you tell us a little bit about how the session controls that we're adding to Teleport help organizations to implement FedRAMP compliance, for example, because it's one of the popular and stricter ones?
Yeah, so I'll just to give a background. So we have many customers who have solutions that they want to sell to the government. And I think it was, do you know, it's about 5 or 6 years ago they started the FedRAMP program, Ev?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It was initially intended for infrastructure only, but a lot of the standard is perfectly applicable to software as well. So it's now getting kind of diluted to anything cloud that government wants to use.
Yeah, and so in that case, if any kind of tool that they want to acquire, you can use like the GovCloud for infrastructure, and that's sort of FedRAMP out of the box. But if you put your software in the GovCloud and your developers are getting access to it, they need to obtain certain controls.
Yep.
And we have a list in our docs here on, or how it works page on all of the controls for FedRAMP for SSH. And one of the new additions in 4.4 is like AC10, and this is limiting the number of concurrent sessions, per assigned organization for the defined number. And this is another checklist. So we've had customers sort of, as they've gone through the FedRAMP program, and an auditor will be like, okay, you have sort of 20 of these 25 controls, you still have these 5 left. And then every 6 months they need to report, okay, we're working with the gravitational team to get this last control. So I think this helps a lot of our current customers obtain the last check and get an auditor off their back.
Yep. And so this is one of the things that we make it easier if you actually pay us, even though Teleport is an open source project, but FedRAMP compliance assistance, this is something we charge money for. So speaking of potential questions like how do you guys make money if your product is open source? All right, so with this out of the way, how about we just stop talking and play with the product? Ben, can you please show us Teleport 4.4 and some of the examples how session control could be used?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you a bit of background. So as you said, set this up well, it's an enterprise cluster. This is starting with FIPS. And so this is all of our FedRAMP compliant teleport module. So it's compiled with Boring Crypto, which is a NIST recognized cryptographic module. And it does a few other kind of features. So it like always enables encryption at rest. In my environment, I have using DynamoDB and S3. This is an alpha, and we have a RC today. So for customers who have been waiting for some of these features, now's pretty good time to try it on your staging environments and give us feedback, and we'll have a general availability next week. So I'm just going to dive in. So one of the first things I'm going to do is just like log into my cluster. This is sort of familiar, so it's like TSH login, and here's my proxy I've set up. I'm using GitHub as my identity provider. This means to open up here. And so this will go in. I've already authenticated with GitHub. I would normally have to kind of log in, and I come back to my terminal and I can see I've been logged into this cluster. I have the role admin and I have access to a range of nodes. And so once you've sort of did the initial authentication, it's pretty easy. You just do TSH, SSH, root at this server. And like now I'm on the EC2 host. I have my demo environment. So this is sort of a relatively familiar flow for people using SSH. Another benefit of Teleport, the proxy can provide a UI for both our audit log and viewing of clusters. Clusters here, they can be different environments or network topology. So this could be your, if you had a GovCloud set up, that will be a separate cluster. And then you can link these two clusters together using Teleport's trusted clusters. I only have one in my test example. And you can see this is sort of mirroring what you saw in the command line experience. So another helpful thing is you have labels in the command line that you can use to sort of filter and find your machines more easily, because, having this EC2 host name isn't very easy to like know what's inside that machine. And so these labels are also a fundamental component for our filtering. And then these are all based on our RBAC. And so in our roles, you can provide access to certain labels. And so a combination of your identity provider, labels on nodes, and RBAC, you can create very powerful restrictions on who gets access to which machines. And these are also dynamic too, so you can have dynamic labels. So you could promote a machine from, like a staging to production, or if you're running a migration, you can like turn off access to that host.
Yeah, my favorite use of labels is like you can detect if a database is running on the machine, and if database is running, so then you label that machine that's a database machine, and then you could have role-based access rule that says like only people in DBA group can access machines with databases via SSH, something like that.
Yeah. And so there's like a range of options that you can provide per role. This is one of the new additions, which is max connections. And so this enforces the ability of only being able to have one connection to the host. And so because I'm already logged in on the terminal and I've just changed it, I'm not able to have another concurrent session for this user. And this also gets reported to Teleport's audit log as well. So we just tweak my role and make it a bit more helpful. Having one role isn't the easiest to get started. And so there's a few other options here. Let me calm down. So here we have auth connectors. Another pretty powerful feature. I don't know, Ev, do you have access to your?
Hold on a sec. Yeah, let me try to open it. So you want me to log in into the same cluster, right?
Yeah. And so you can see here, this is the active session that I have in process in my terminal. And another powerful feature of Teleport is that Ev has the ability to join me in this session.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, go on, you can do it. It's a live
All
demo.
right. I'm typing something on my machine.
And so you can see here, Ev's joined, and here's myself. And so this is like a very powerful feature, but this is also something that you might want to turn off. And this is another control that you have in Teleport's rollback. And so if I exit this, there's no active sessions, but we also have a full audit log of what happened during the session. And Teleport has this sort of DVR type functionality that you can come back and you can see the commands that are ran. And this is where I've sort of came onto my box. And I can just show you a few other things with this cluster. This is the combination of our proxy auth and the node. So I sort of have the ability to see the configuration. In here, you can see this is sort of set up. So all of our audit logs go to S3 and our events go to DynamoDB. And we also have the client idle timeout is 30 minutes on this machine. This is sort of a bit hard to demo, but all of this is configurable on a per cluster basis. And this is sort of an example of dynamic labels. So you can hit any local file and sort of change whatever command you want. So we have customers using EC2 tags for this as well. So, Ev, is there any bit here that you think I've missed from my demo?
No, I think it was a pretty decent overview. Like one question people might be asking, so what is that node that instead of listing its IP address, it says tunnel? So what is that?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So this is a node that dials back to the Teleport auth server. So historically, all of Teleport's nodes would have to connect in the same network space and sort of VPC, as it were, and then you would connect those together using trusted clusters. This one connects back via the proxies, which can be publicly accessible on the internet. You can think of it as the hardened bastion host. And so this one is in a sort of a separate VPC. It can be hardened. This could even be, like an edge device or another zone. So it can be a helpful way of sort of connecting more devices.
Yeah, so the tunnel in this case, it means that it's, so tunnel from where to where?
This is a tunnel from another like US West region and it's in a different VPC.
Yeah, so the node basically connects to this cluster and then Teleport uses that tunnel to establish connection from a user to that device.
Yeah, but the interaction of Teleport's the same. It does support labels, but I didn't add labels during my demo.
All right. So thank you, Ben. That was a wonderful demonstration of Teleport 4.4. So now let's see if anyone in the audience has any questions. So you could use a Q&A button on Zoom to ask questions, and they will go to my user interface here. So I will repeat what you're asking, and we'll try our best to answer those. Is it just me, or there's no questions? All right, so if there are no questions, oh, no, hold on a second, there is one.
That's a question.
Will the host name be displayed in the tab of the session instead of the session's ID? That's a good one. That's a good one. So Ben, can you show us the UI again so we can talk about this?
Yeah, I think this could be, there was a bug in 4.4. So if I was to come in here, you'd see that this would be this host. This is now the host name instead of the internal reference. I think that might answer the question. And this was fixed in 4.4.
Can the host name be displayed in the tab of the session? So basically you're saying that that's like what we're looking at is a temporary UI bug that we're fixing, right?
Yeah, this used to show, so one of the technical concerns of host names is that Teleport can support hosts with the same host name because you can set your host name to anything. So we sort of don't trust the host name, so we have our own internal registry. But humans kind of understand the relation of what the host name means. And so,
but are we fixing this though?
Yeah, this has been fixed in 4.4.
4.4, okay.
Yeah, in this version.
So
I think in 4.3, there was just a regression that it didn't show.
Yeah, because Radoslav says that it didn't work for him in 4.3.7. Okay, so it's good to know that we fixed it. Then the second question is, can you enforce to have a certain number of same kind of user, like only 2 administrators? I trying to understand how to interpret this question. So if the question is like there are only 2 admins within an organization, like two real people, then the way you would enforce it, I guess, is you only have, like if you have a group called admins, so the group will have 2 users. But if the question is like, can we only have 2 admins logged into the cluster at the same time? Basically concurrent sessions per group.
Oh, yeah. No, in this implementation, the concurrent sessions are per individual. So if I give you 2 sessions, you get 2, I get 2. Yeah, it's not cluster wide.
Yeah. And Marco, if we're not answering your question, you can just clarify in chat. So we tried our best to interpret the meaning of your question. Okay, not much. Okay. So that was, I didn't realize that things are disappearing here. Okay, currently the username on Teleport CLI is assumed to be either username from the machine you're using or a given explicitly. Hold on, that was not a question. Ben, I think Radoslav is asking if we plan to make it configurable, the username of Teleport CLI to be...
instead of TSH?
Yeah, when TSH, like if you don't give TSH user, it behaves exactly the same way as like regular, like OpenSSH command. So it takes the user of a machine and assumes that that's the user. So the question then becomes like, are we planning to make it configurable? It kind of is configurable already. Like if you show your .tsh directory, there are these profile files that are created per cluster.
Yeah, this one here.
So if you show that YAML file,
Yep.
Yeah, so you could basically change the user in this file. So that would be the default user for that cluster. Radoslav, are we answering your question? All right, awesome. So any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, looks like we are about done. So thank you, Ben, very much for the fantastic demo, and thank you, the audience, for the great questions. Thank you all for attending. And if you'd like to learn more about modern secure access to infrastructure, please check out our blog at gravitational.com/blog and follow us on Twitter. Now, on behalf of Gravitational, enjoy the rest of the day while you shelter in place and be safe.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.